Oh God, Mom. She sounds like a damn whale chewing away. That disgusting cow turns my stomach. I'm only with her for the money, obviously. Who in their right mind would be with that woman if it wasn't for the cash? That was my husband's voice. Richard's. The man who kissed my cheek every single blessed morning. And those words. My God, those words. They poured into my ears and ran down my throat like acid, burning everything on the inside. I was just standing there in the second-floor hallway of my own home, my hand resting on the polished brass doorknob of our bedroom door. I was about to go in, ask him if he wanted any coffee, but my hand just froze. My whole body turned into a statue of ice. On the other end of the line, I heard his mother, Dorothy, let out a laugh. A thin, nasty cackle that sounded like shattered glass. The blood just drained from my face in an instant. I could taste metal in my mouth. The whole luxurious hallway, with that Moroccan rug I'd bought on a trip years ago, it suddenly felt like it was tilting. I had to grab the doorframe just to keep from falling over. And I kept listening. I had to listen. I needed to know the exact size of the hole I'd fallen into these last 7 years. After she finished her cackling, I heard Dorothy ask with that little conspiratorial voice of hers about the plan. About when he was finally going to get rid of me and take what was his by right. Richard's voice got all instructive, like he was explaining basic math to a child. He told her to relax, reminded her right there through that door about our prenuptial agreement, the one he'd convinced me to sign, telling me it was romantic, that it proved our love. He explained to his mother about the 9-year dissolution clause, how after that mark, everything that was mine would become marital property, at least half of it. And then he dropped the bomb. The sentence that became my new battle cry, it's only 18 more months. Just gotta stick it out a little longer. 18 months, and I file for divorce, take my millions, and never have to look at her face again. 18 months. That's all my life was worth. My love, my devotion, all my sacrifices. I was a countdown clock, a time-locked safe, and he and his mother were just sitting there, waiting for the click so they could open it up and take everything. In that moment, something inside of me cracked. But it wasn't the sound of something breaking to fall apart. It was the sound of a thick shell splintering to reveal something hard as a diamond underneath. The pain was immeasurable. It was physical, a sharp stab in my chest that took my breath away. But the humiliation? Honey, the humiliation was the gasoline that lit a furnace inside of me. Slowly, without making a single sound, I took my hand off the doorknob. I backed away, step by step, like I was moving away from a crime scene. My crime had been loving him, trusting him. I walked down the stairs, each step a silent echo of my own foolishness. I crossed the living room, and my eyes landed on the picture frame on the mantelpiece. A photo of us in Paris. Him smiling, me smiling. A lie framed in silver. But to understand just how massive this fall was, how deep this betrayal cut, you need to understand where I came from. My name is Diane. I'm 57 years old, and I live here in Nashville, Tennessee. Now, I wasn't some heiress born with a silver spoon in my mouth. My daddy was a good, hard-working man, and when he passed, he left me $35,000. And honey, that was every last cent he had in the world. I took that money, which to me was worth more than all the gold in the world, and I invested it. I studied the Nashville real estate market like my life depended on it, because it did. I bought a little house, fixed it up with my own 2 hands, and flipped it. Then I bought 2, and flipped them. In 18 years, I turned that $35,000 into a net worth of over $6,200,000. My company, my properties, my home, all built with my sweat, my smarts, and a hell of a lot of sleepless nights. I was at the top of my game, respected, successful, but I was lonely. And then, 8 years ago, at a charity benefit in Charleston, South Carolina, Richard just appeared. He was charming, handsome, and he seemed to see me in a way nobody ever had before. He didn't just see the tough businesswoman. He said he saw the woman. He listened to me. He praised me. He made me feel desired. We dated for 10 months. He proposed at a fancy rooftop dinner with a beautiful view of the city lights, opened a little box with a diamond ring, and told me I was the strongest, most inspiring woman he'd ever met, that he wanted to spend the rest of his days by my side, supporting me. Supporting me. What a cruel joke. I was so blinded by loneliness, so desperate for a partner, that I ignored all the red flags, his business ventures that never quite panned out, the brilliant ideas that always needed a little seed money from me. $128,000. That's the total I poured into him over the years. $128,000 for the man who calls me a disgusting whale behind my back. And Dorothy, his mother, from day one of our relationship, the little comments disguised as concern. I remember her telling me, "Diane, honey, don't you think that dress makes you look a little full?" Or, "You work so hard, bless your heart. You just don't have time to take care of yourself, do you?" And I, the complete fool, I just smiled and said it was fine. I wanted her approval so badly. I wanted to build a real family. I got to the kitchen. My heart was still hammering against my ribs. I opened the fridge, took out the pitcher of ice water, and filled a glass to the brim. My hands were steady. I drank it all in one go, feeling the cold go down and put out a little bit of that fire that was consuming me from the inside. I sat down at the granite island, right in the center of my dream kitchen, and I waited. I waited for the actor to come down from his stage. It didn't take long. I heard the bedroom door open, his footsteps on the stairs. He walked into the kitchen with that rehearsed smile, came right over to me, gave me a kiss on the forehead. The smell of the expensive cologne I'd bought him for his last birthday made me want to gag. He suggested with that smooth lion voice of his that we go out to dinner at that little French bistro I loved. I raised my eyes and looked at him, really looked at him. And for the first time in 7 years, I didn't see my husband. I saw a stranger, a parasite, a second-rate actor in a role that had just come to an end. I forced the best smile I could and said in a steady voice, without a single tremor, that I couldn't, that I had a terrible headache. The disappointment on his face was instant. He covered it up quick, of course, said it was a shame, that he'd just grab a bite out somewhere. He took the keys to the car, that 2020 Mercedes I bought for him, and left. The garage door rumbled shut, and the silence returned. But it wasn't a peaceful silence anymore. It was the silence of a battlefield, seconds before the war begins. He had a plan. Him and his mother. 18 months. They thought I was stupid. They thought I was just some lonely fat woman with a fat bank account. They underestimated me. And underestimation, my friend, is a powerful weapon in the hands of someone who knows how to use it. I got up, walked to my office, the very place where I built my empire, sat down in my leather chair, opened my laptop, and the screen lit up my face in the dark. His plan was good, but mine was gonna be better. He wanted to play a game? Fine. Oh, we were gonna play. But it was gonna be by my rules, and in my game, the house always wins. I took a deep breath and said out loud to the empty room, like a sacred vow, 18 months? You're not gonna get 18 hours, you son of a bitch. I didn't sleep that night. Not a wink. After Richard left, with the sound of his car's engine fading down the quiet street, the rage that had set me on fire started to cool into something else. It was a cold fire, a dangerous, crystal clarity. The hurt was still there, you know? A black hole in my chest. But I just shoved it into a corner. Pain was a luxury I couldn't afford. Pain makes you weak, makes you cry, makes you second-guess everything. And I didn't have time for any of that. I had a war to plan. I went into my office and I shut the door. That room was my sanctuary, the nerve center of my entire business. The walls were covered with blueprints, photos of finished projects, profit projection charts. It was the one place I felt completely powerful. I sat down in my chair, the same one where I'd closed million-dollar deals, and I opened my laptop. The first thing I did was create a new, password-protected file. I named it something simple, damage control. And then I started to list, line by line, with the precision of a forensic accountant. First, my assets. The house, $980,000. The company, valued at $3.8 million. My investment and retirement accounts, another $1.4 million. A total of $6.2 million. My stomach clenched. Half of it, He thought he was going to walk away with over $3 million of my sweat, my blood, my life. Next, I listed the threats. And on the first line, I wrote his name, Richard Patterson. And right next to it, in parentheses, I wrote, Parasite. As I typed, the memories started coming back like flashes, but now they had a different color, a different smell. They were like scenes from a movie I used to love, but now I knew it was all fake. My mind took me back to Charleston, 8 years ago. I was at a charity auction, sitting alone at a table after a long day. I felt out of place. I was one of the only women there who owned her own company. And you can bet I was one of the few black women there who owned her own business. I was used to being underestimated, used to having to prove myself 10 times over. And then he walked up, Richard, tall, charming, with a smile that lit up the whole room. He didn't use any of those cheap pickup lines. He looked at my auction paddle with my name on it and said something that disarmed me right away. Diane Morrison. Morrison Properties. I've heard of you. That commercial development project you did in East Nashville was brilliant. He didn't comment on my dress or how I looked. He talked about my work, and that got to me. We talked for hours. He seemed genuinely interested in everything. My story, how I started with that $35,000 from my daddy. He asked smart questions, looked me right in the eye. I felt seen. For the first time in a long, long time, I wasn't just a walk-in bank account or a tough-as-nails businesswoman. I was a woman, and I was terribly lonely. I see it now, of course. He was a predator, and he smelled my loneliness from a mile away. But back then, I thought I'd found my equal, my soulmate. 10 months later, he proposed. It was at a rooftop dinner with a gorgeous view of the city. He opened a small box with a diamond ring and told me I was the strongest, most inspiring woman he'd ever met, that he wanted to spend the rest of his life by my side, supporting me. What a cruel twist of fate. When we went to discuss the prenup, my lawyer, a tough, no-nonsense woman, had drafted an ironclad document, but it was him who suggested that 9-year clause. He looked at me with those puppy dog eyes of his and said, Diane, I don't want us to ever think about divorce, but if we make it 9 years together, doesn't that prove our love is real? That after that, we're a unit, a team. What's mine is yours, and what's yours is mine. And I, the woman who negotiated with real estate sharks, I fell for it. I fell for it like an idiot. I thought it was romantic, a testament to his love. Oh, it was a testament, all right. A testament to his patience and his greed. The list on my computer kept growing. I started detailing every investment I'd made in him. The fitness app that never got off the ground, $18,000. The digital marketing firm without a single client, $32,000. His attempt at being a crypto trader, where he lost $43,000 in an unfortunate market dip. Every time, a sad story, a well-crafted excuse, and I, the supportive partner, I signed the check. I wanted so badly for him to feel successful, to have something of his own. Little did I know, his only successful project was me, and as the list of money got longer, the most painful memory surfaced. It wasn't about the money, it was about the humiliation. I remembered a pool party, maybe 2 years ago, at his brother's house. I was helping myself to some coleslaw when Dorothy came up and said, right in front of everyone, "Careful, dear, you won't fit into your wedding dress at that rate. Oh wait, you're already married, aren't you?" And she laughed. Richard, who was standing right next to her, he laughed too. In that moment, I felt so small, so ashamed. I gave a weak little smile and ate less than I wanted. Later that night in the car, I told him it had hurt my feelings. He just said, "Oh, honey, you know how Mom is. She was just kidding. You take things way too seriously." He made me believe I was the one who was wrong, that I was too sensitive, that their cruelty was just a joke. I know better now. It wasn't a joke. It was a test. It was conditioning. They were breaking me down, piece by piece, so that when he finally discarded me, I'd feel so worthless I wouldn't even fight back. So I'd believe I deserved to be abandoned. The sun started to rise, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. I'd been up all night. The list was done. The memories, now organized like evidence in a crime, had given me the strength I needed. His plan was to take half of everything. My plan was now to make sure he walked out of my life with the clothes on his back and a mountain of debt. I picked up my cell phone. It was 5:15 in the morning. I knew she'd be awake. She always was. Vanessa, my business partner and my best friend for over 20 years. The only person in the world, besides my late father, who had never underestimated me. I found her name in my contacts and hit call. The phone rang once. She answered, her voice sleepy but alert, asking if everything was okay. I took a deep breath, and in the voice of a CEO, not a betrayed wife, I said, "Vanessa, it's me. I need you. Get our legal and financial team together. Emergency meeting in 1 hour. We have a fire to put out, a big one." Vanessa didn't ask another question. She's that kind of person. When I use that tone of voice, she knows it's not time for small talk. She just said she'd be there in 40 minutes and the coffee would be on. And she hung up. I stood up and walked to the half bath in my office. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. My eyes were red from exhaustion, with dark circles underneath, but there was a fire in them that hadn't been there before. It was the fire of war. I didn't look like a victim. I looked like a general. I took a quick shower, put on one of my most expensive suits, a Navy Tom Ford I saved for the toughest negotiations. It was my armor. When Richard finally woke up, around 7, I was already in the kitchen, laptop open on the granite island, a cup of coffee by my side. He came down yawning and gave me a kiss on the cheek. His touch sent a wave of revulsion through my body, but I forced a smile. I asked him if he'd slept well. He said he slept like a log. Then he asked about my headache. I told him I was feeling much better, but I had an emergency meeting at the office about a problem with one of the new commercial developments, and I might be late. He replied with an, "Oh, that's a shame," so fake it was insulting, told me to call if I needed anything, grabbed an apple, gave me another kiss, and left for the gym. The sheer normalcy of the scene was surreal. He was living out the last days of his fool's paradise, and he had no idea. I arrived at my office in downtown Nashville, and Vanessa was already there, the conference table all set up with pastries, fruit, and 3 large carafes of strong coffee. Robert, our accountant of 15 years, and Lawrence, our corporate lawyer, were already seated, looking concerned. They thought it was a business crisis. Little did they know, the crisis was deep, deeply personal. I shut the door to the glass-walled conference room that overlooked the city. I looked at them, my 2 pillars, the people who helped me build everything. And I looked at Vanessa, my sister in everything but blood. I took a deep breath and said, "The problem isn't with the company. It's with Richard." For the next 20 minutes, I told them everything. Every word I'd heard through that door. The whale, the disgusting cow, the 18-month plan, his mother's role in it all. As I spoke, Robert's face went pale. Lawrence started scribbling frantic notes on his legal pad. Vanessa just sat there in silence, but you could see the fury building in her eyes. Her hand, holding a pen, was clenched so tight her knuckles turned white. When I finished, a heavy silence filled the room. Robert spoke first, saying he was so sorry and that from a financial standpoint, the clause was catastrophic and we needed to act fast. Lawrence agreed, explaining Richard could be entitled to half of everything accrued during the marriage, including the appreciation of the company, which could be in the millions. But it was Vanessa who slammed her hand on the table, making the coffee cups jump. Her voice was low but thick with a rage I knew well. She spoke with a force that just lifted me up. "Millions? That worthless son of a bitch isn't getting a damn dime. Diane, do you hear me? You built this from the ground up with your bare hands." He walked into this marriage with a suitcase of clothes and a fake smile, and that is exactly what he's going to walk out with. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. She turned to me, her eyes locked on mine. "You are not going to be the victim in this story. You are going to be the damn predator. We are going to hunt him." Her words were like a shot of adrenaline straight to the heart. It was exactly what I needed to hear. I wasn't alone. I had my army. I took command. I told Robert to run a full audit of every dime that had moved from my accounts to his. I told Lawrence to review the prenup with a microscope, looking for any loophole. Then I turned to Vanessa and said we needed bigger guns. I needed the best asset protection lawyer in the country, a real shark. and I needed information on everything Richard had been doing behind my back. Vanessa smiled, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She already had 2 names for me. The first was Victoria Brennan, a Chicago lawyer known as The Wall, who specialized in protecting fortunes in high-stakes divorces. The second was Daniel Hayes, a discreet private investigator, ex-military, whose motto was, "The truth, no matter how inconvenient." Vanessa assured me that Victoria would wall off my money and Daniel would find every skeleton in Richard's closet. And she had a feeling that closet was packed full. I picked up my phone. I didn't hesitate. I called Victoria Brennan's office in Chicago. The secretary tried to schedule me for 3 weeks out, but I cut her off. I told her to inform Ms. Brennan that it was a code-red emergency involving an 8-figure prenup with an impending dissolution clause, and that I would be there the next day, with or without an appointment. While I waited for a call back, I dialed Daniel Hayes' number. A man with a calm, deep voice answered on the first ring. I introduced myself, said Vanessa had passed along his contact and that I needed to hire him. He just said, "I'm listening." I took a breath and told him to find out everything about my husband. Every secret, every lie, every dollar. There was a short pause, and then he replied with a professional calm that gave me confidence. "Understood, Mrs. Morrison. Consider it done. You'll have my first report in 96 hours. The next 3 days were the performance of a lifetime. I deserved an Oscar. On the outside, I was the same Diane. Woke up at 5, made coffee, read the financial news. When Richard came down, I'd smile and ask about his day. I fixed supper, always his favorite dishes, herb-crusted lamb, garlic-roasted potatoes. I moved through my house, my life, like an actress on a familiar stage, reciting lines I knew by heart. But on the inside, I was on high alert. Every cell in my body was humming with a mixture of rage, disgust, and a cold adrenaline. Every smile I gave him was an act of war. Every meal I served was a strategic move. I watched him. I'd never really watched Richard before. I'd looked at him, but I hadn't seen him. Now, I saw everything. The way his eyes lit up when he talked about money. The subtle impatience when I took too long to answer a question. The way he'd take his phone and walk into another room for certain calls. The first night was the worst. Lying in the same bed with him was torture. I waited for him to fall asleep, which didn't take long. He always slept like a stone, the clear conscience of a scoundrel. I just lay there in the dark, listening to him breathe, the man who called me a whale. I could smell his scent on the pillow, and I had to fight the urge to be sick. The disgust was physical. I wanted to get up, pack my things, and just disappear. But Vanessa's voice echoed in my head. "You're not going to be the victim. You're going to be the predator. And predators don't run. They wait for the right moment to strike." The second day was a blur of anxiety. I spent the day at the office trying to focus on spreadsheets and contracts, but my mind was elsewhere. My phone felt like it weighed a ton in my pocket. Every notification made my heart leap. Was this it? Was this Daniel's report? I became obsessed with checking my email, refreshing my inbox every 5 minutes. Nothing. The silence was maddening. That night, Richard came home with flowers. White orchids, my favorite. He handed them to me with a smile and said, "Just because I love you." The sweet scent of the flowers filled the kitchen, and for a split second, a foolish part of me, the old Diane, wanted to believe him, wanted to think I'd gotten it all wrong, that this was all just a bad dream. But then I looked in his eyes, and there was nothing there. It was an empty, calculated gesture. He was playing his part, trying to keep me docile, happy, distracted. I took the flowers, smiled, and said, "Thank you, honey. They're beautiful." And as I put them in a vase, I thought, it's going to take a hell of a lot more than flowers to pay for what you've done. Finally, on the morning of the 4th day, exactly 96 hours after my call with Daniel, the email arrived. I was at my desk in the office, in the middle of a conference call. My phone buzzed. I glanced down. The notification on the screen was short, professional, and it made my blood run cold. From Daniel Hayes. Subject, Initial Report, R. Patterson. I nearly choked. I excused myself from the meeting, making up some excuse, and hurried to my private office. I locked the door. My hands were shaking a little now. I sat down in my chair and opened the email on my computer. There was a single password-protected PDF attachment. The password, as Daniel had instructed, was my mother's maiden name, a touch of security that felt strangely personal. I typed in the password and the file opened, and all hell opened up with it. It was worse, 1,000 times worse than I could have ever imagined. My brain processed the information in chunks, each one a harder punch than the last. First, the mistress. Her name was Ashley, 29 years old. There were photos, lots of photos. Them at restaurants, his arm around her. Them leaving an apartment building in Green Hills, a wealthy part of Nashville. She was the perfect cliché, red hair, thin, with that kind of cheap beauty you see everywhere. In one of the photos, she was wearing a bracelet, an emerald bracelet I recognized instantly. Richard had given it to me on our 4th wedding anniversary. He'd claimed it went missing on a trip. It hadn't gone missing. He gave it to her. Second, the apartment. Daniel's report detailed the luxury condo in Green Hills. The rent was $3,800 a month, paid in cash, by Richard, for almost 3 years. I did the math in my head. $136,800, just in rent. My money. Third, the gambling. Richard had a secret life of online sports betting, and he wasn't good at it. Daniel had tracked the transactions through hidden accounts. The total debt was $187,000. And it wasn't to some cute, friendly online casino. It was to loan sharks, dangerous people. The urgency of his plan suddenly made perfect sense. He wasn't just greedy. He was desperate. He was in over his head. And finally, the pettiest betrayal of all. Daniel had discovered that, for the last year, Richard had been siphoning small amounts of money from our joint household account. $200 here, $300 there. An inflated grocery bill, a car maintenance fee that never happened. The total, $16,500. It was an almost insignificant amount compared to the rest, but it was what hurt the most. The big con, the mistress, the debt. That was the work of a criminal. But stealing coffee money from your wife's account? That was the work of a rat. It showed the depths of his contempt for me. I read the report 2-3 times, every word cementing my resolve. The pain was completely gone now, replaced by a sharp, cutting ice. I wasn't dealing with an unfaithful husband anymore. I was dealing with an enemy who had infiltrated my life and was bleeding me dry. I scrolled to the bottom of the document, my mind already running through 1,000 different scenarios. And then I saw it. There was a final note from Daniel just above his digital signature. Only 2 lines. But they were the 2 most terrifying lines in the entire report. He wrote, "Mrs. Morrison, this appears to be only the tip of the iceberg. The way he is moving money, the nature of these debts. It suggests a desperation that goes beyond a simple gambling problem. I advise caution. I will continue to investigate." The tip of the iceberg. My God, what else could there be? What could possibly be worse than all this? I slammed my laptop shut, the click of the lid sounding like the closing of a coffin. The coffin of my marriage, of the woman I used to be. I looked out my office window at the city below, a city I helped build, and I made a promise to myself. I was not going to let that man drag me down with him. If there was an iceberg, I wasn't going to be the Titanic. I was going to be the damn ocean that swallowed it whole. Daniel's note echoed in my head the entire flight from Nashville to Chicago the next morning. The tip of the iceberg. What kind of monster had I let into my home? Fear tried to creep in. That cold kind that paralyzes you. But every time it did, the image of Richard's smiling face handing me those white orchids flashed through my mind, and the fear turned right back into rage. Rage kept me warm. Rage kept me focused. I'd called Victoria Brennan's secretary back as soon as I read the report. I didn't have to say another word. The woman informed me that Victoria had cleared her schedule and would be expecting me at 10 a.m. When the plane landed in Chicago, I felt like a general heading to a war council. I wasn't going to ask for help. I was going to hire heavy artillery. Victoria Brennan's office was at the top of a skyscraper in downtown Chicago, with a view that seemed to swallow all of Millennium Park. It was a place that screamed power and money. The waiting room was silent, decorated with modern art and minimalist furniture. Everything about it said, "This is gonna cost you, but it'll be worth it." Victoria Brennan didn't make me wait. She came out to greet me herself. She was a woman in her 50s, tall, impeccably dressed in a navy suit that probably cost more than a small car. Her gray hair was cut in a short, stylish bob, and her eyes, behind thin-rimmed glasses, were impossibly sharp. They didn't show pity or sympathy. They showed analysis. She looked me up and down, not in a judging way, but like an engineer studying a complex problem. She called me by my first name, invited me in, and said her team was ready, and that Vanessa had already sent a summary. The conference room was even more impressive. Vanessa was already there, sitting next to Robert, my accountant, who'd caught the first flight out of Nashville with me. They both had grim expressions. Victoria sat at the head of the table and motioned for me to begin. I didn't sugarcoat it. I didn't cry. I presented the facts. I opened my laptop, and for an hour, I laid it all out on the table. The conversation I'd overheard, his plan, the dissolution clause, the history of our marriage, the investments I'd made in him, and finally, Daniel's report. I projected the PDF onto the large screen in the conference room, the pictures of Richard with Ashley, the bank statements from the secret accounts, the list of gambling debts. As I spoke, no one interrupted. Victoria, Vanessa, and Robert just stared at the screen, taking in every sordid detail. When I finished, the silence in the room was heavy. Robert looked like he was going to be sick. Vanessa's jaw was clenched with rage. Victoria Brennan, however, looked calm. She took off her glasses, slowly cleaned them with a cloth, and put them back on. Then she looked directly at me and said that while the situation was appalling, from a legal standpoint, it was excellent ammunition. Adultery, dissipation of assets, it all helped our case. But she made it clear it didn't solve the main problem. She stood up and walked to the screen, pointing to the copy of our prenuptial agreement. She explained that the 9-year clause was the real issue. In 18 months, the line between my premarital and marital assets was going to get blurry. She detailed how the appreciation of my company and my house could be claimed by him. She was blunt. His plan wasn't stupid, it was greedy. A chill went down my spine. I asked her what we could do. Victoria smiled for the first time. It was a thin, predatory smile. We build a fortress, and we start building it yesterday. For the next 30 minutes, she laid out a plan so brilliant and intricate that even I, a seasoned businesswoman, was in awe. She explained how we'd restructure my company into a web of LLCs to shield the assets. Robert, my accountant, his jaw dropped, saying it'd be a nightmare to trace the money. Victoria agreed. Next, she detailed the creation of an irrevocable trust for my personal assets, explaining that once in the trust, they would no longer legally be mine. Vanessa let out a wide grin and muttered, "I love this woman." Victoria just nodded, ignoring the comment, and continued, saying there was one major vulnerability: the house. She described it as a battleground, the most visible and emotionally charged asset, and said the only solution was to sell it. Now, the blow hit harder than I expected. Sell my house. The place I'd designed, I'd built, my sanctuary. I whispered, "But it's my home." Victoria walked over to me, put a hand on my shoulder, and said firmly that it wasn't a home anymore, it was a battleground. She explained we needed to liquidate the asset in a quick, all-cash transaction. Once that money went into the trust, it would be untouchable. By the time Richard found out, it'd be too late. I looked at Vanessa. She gave a slow nod, her eyes saying, "She's right." I closed my eyes for a second. I pictured Richard and Dorothy, laughing. The whale, the disgusting cow, the 18-month countdown, the image of them celebrating my financial ruin. I opened my eyes. The hurt had turned to ice again. My house wasn't a home. It was a prize my enemy coveted, and I would never, ever let him get his hands on my prize. I looked at Victoria Brennan, the Wall of Chicago, and in the steadiest voice I'd ever had, I gave the order. Find me a buyer. The flight back to Nashville was different. I didn't feel fear or sadness. I felt a clarity of purpose I hadn't had in years. I was a woman on a mission. Victoria Brennan's plan was my Bible, and I was going to follow every step with the precision of a surgeon. Selling my house still hurt somewhere deep down, but I had caged that emotion. It was a necessary casualty of war. As soon as we landed, still at the airport, I made the call. Her name was Patricia Mills. Patricia was a legend in Nashville's luxury real estate market. She didn't just sell houses, she made houses disappear from the market, quietly, for outrageous prices. If you were a celebrity or a CEO who wanted to buy or sell without a fuss, you called Patricia. I introduced myself and got straight to the point. I told her I needed to sell my house fast, quiet, and for cash, and that speed and secrecy were the top priorities. There was a short pause. Patricia was sharp. A sale like this meant one of three things: debt, divorce, or death. She just said, understood, and that she'd consider it done. She asked if she could start showing the house the next day, only to pre-qualified buyers and under strict non-disclosure agreements. I agreed, but with one condition. The showings could only happen between 10 a.m. and 3 p.m., because my husband could not find out. Her response put me at ease. Diane, don't you worry about a thing. I'm a vault. Your husband won't even know a flower vase has been moved. And so, the game began. For the next few days, my house, my sanctuary, became a silent stage. While Richard was out, playing tennis or, as I now knew, visiting his mistress, Patricia's discreet car would pull up down the street. Potential buyers, tech executives, doctors would slip in and out, guided by Patricia, who had a copy of my key. I spent those days in my office, my heart in my throat, waiting for the phone to ring. It was a military operation. At 3 o'clock sharp, everything would be back to normal. When Richard came home, there wasn't a single sign that strangers had walked our halls. And Richard, oh Richard, he started to change. Maybe it was intuition. Maybe the loan sharks were turning up the heat. He started getting more present, clingy. He brought flowers, suggested dinners, asked about my day with an interest that sounded completely fake. He was laying it on thicker than ever, trying to reinforce that image of the devoted husband. And then the push for my company began. One night, we were having dinner in the kitchen. I'd made his favorite grilled sea bass. He put his fork down and looked at me with a serious expression, saying he'd been thinking about how hard I worked and how he felt useless. And then he dropped it. I think it's time I took a more active role, a partner role maybe. I could help with the marketing, the new acquisitions. What do you think? My fork stopped an inch from my mouth. There it was, the next step in his plan. Infiltrate my company. Get access to the books, the contracts, the accounts. If he became a partner, even just on paper, his position in a divorce to claim half of everything would be infinitely stronger. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. I chewed slowly, swallowed, and then I gave him my sweetest, most condescending smile. I told him that was so thoughtful of him, but honestly, it would be a nightmare with the new complex corporate structure. I deflected with a compliment, treating him like a cute but incapable child. He didn't like that. I saw a flash of frustration in his eyes, but he couldn't argue. He forced a smile and changed the subject, but I knew he'd try again. His clock was ticking, and he was getting nervous. 4 days later, Patricia called. I was in my car, coming back from a construction site. I had to pull over. She said she had an offer. A very good offer. My heart leaped. She explained it was from a pharmaceutical executive from Boston who had fallen in love with the house. He'd made an all-cash offer, $75,000 over asking, and he wanted to close in 7 days. 7 days. It was fast, almost too fast, but it was perfect. Accelerating the timeline was my best defense. I told Patricia she was an angel and to accept the offer. But before she hung up, she added that the buyer wanted the house fully furnished and would pay extra. My furniture, my decor. I was silent for a moment. My things. The kitchen table where I was sitting when my world fell apart. The bed where I lay next to my enemy. Suddenly, the idea of getting rid of it all felt liberating. A clean slate, a fresh start. I told her, even better, Patricia. He can have it all. I hung up the phone feeling a power I hadn't felt in a very, very long time. The plan was in motion. The fortress was being built, and the enemy couldn't even hear the sound of the hammers. I was in control. But my euphoria was short-lived. That same night, as I was in my office reviewing the preliminary sale documents, my phone rang. It was Dorothy. I hesitated, but I knew I had to answer to see what the other side was planning. I answered with my sweetest voice. She, in a voice like poisoned honey, invited us to a family dinner on Sunday, saying it had been too long and she had so much to catch up on. A trap. I knew it was a trap. They were plotting something. But it was my turn to make a move. I replied in the cheeriest tone I could fake. Of course, Dorothy, that would be wonderful. We'd love to come. The week leading up to that dinner was one of the longest of my life. I was living a full-time double life. By day, I was in constant contact with Patricia, Victoria, and Robert, signing documents electronically, approving the paperwork for the house sale and the company restructuring. The contracts were complex, the clauses were dense, but I read every single line. I was building my ark, and I couldn't have a single leak. By night, I was the dutiful wife, making small talk with Richard, asking about his day, feigning interest as he rambled on about tennis or some article he'd read. The hardest part was the theater of normalcy. I had to pack up my life in secret. When Richard was out, I moved through the house like a thief. I'd bring boxes up from the basement, and instead of packing plates and books, I'd pack the things that mattered. Photo albums of my parents, my grandmother's jewelry, important documents, old contracts. I'd hide the boxes in a corner of the garage, behind some old shelves, praying he wouldn't see them. Every object I packed was a small goodbye to the life I thought I had. On Sunday night, we got ready for dinner. I chose a simple, elegant dress, nothing flashy. I didn't want to give them any ammunition. Richard, on the other hand, seemed excited. He put on his best suit, splashed on cologne. He thought this dinner was part of his plan. He probably figured with his mother on his side, they could corner me, manipulate me. His naivete was almost pathetic. We arrived at Dorothy's house, a beautiful home in a gated community that, of course, I had helped with the down payment for years ago as a Mother's Day gift. She greeted us at the door with a tight hug. Her embrace was cold, her thin bones digging into me. She looked at me and said, "Diane, dear, you look great." I knew great was her code for still fat. The dinner was a masterclass in hypocrisy. The table was perfect, the roast was delicious, and the little barbs started flying, disguised as innocent conversation. Dorothy started by asking about my business, remarking how I was always so busy and that I had to be careful not to let work consume my life. It was the beginning of the neglectful wife narrative. I just smiled and said business was good, but that I loved what I did and that Richard was such a wonderful support. He tried to back his mother up, saying he worried about me, that I pushed myself too hard. I put my hand on his and told him that's why I loved him. They were losing. Every attack they launched, I deflected with a compliment. The frustration on Dorothy's face was visible. She changed tactics, telling a story about a friend's daughter who'd given up her career to support her husband, to be a true partner. The insult was so direct, I almost choked. She was calling me less of a woman. I looked her directly in the eye and said, my voice soft, that every woman has her own path, and that Richard would never ask me to give up who I am. I tossed the ball back to him, and he went pale and had to agree. The key moment came at the end of the night. Richard had gone to the restroom. I offered to help Dorothy in the kitchen. This was the moment she'd been waiting for. Alone, she leaned against the sink, crossed her arms, and dropped the facade. She told me, her voice cold, that she could see her son wasn't happy, that a man like him needed attention, needed to be a priority. And then she delivered the key line. Maybe the kindest thing you could do for him is to let him go. Let him find someone who can put him first. There it was. The plan, spoken out loud. They wanted me to file for divorce. They wanted me to be the bad guy. The manipulation was so disgusting, so calculated. I stopped what I was doing. I closed the dishwasher door, slowly. I turned and faced my mother-in-law. For the first time all night, I let my smile drop. I looked into her eyes with all the coldness I felt in my heart, and then I smiled again. But this was a different smile. It was the smile of someone holding the winning card. In a voice as sweet and dangerous as a whisper, I said, "Dorothy, Why on earth would I do that? I love my husband. The look on her face was priceless. Shock, anger, frustration. Just then, Richard walked back into the kitchen. I turned to him, my warm smile back on, and said his mother and I were just talking about what a lucky man he was. The ride home was silent. Richard was visibly annoyed. Their plan had failed. I looked out the car window, the city lights a blur. The sale of my house would be final in 2 days. The dinner hadn't been a defeat, it had been a confirmation. They weren't going to stop. They were going to keep pushing, keep prodding, until I broke. But they didn't know I'd already broken, and that my broken pieces had been glued back together in a new way, much stronger, and much, much more dangerous. The final 2 days before the closing were like living inside a ticking clock. The tension was so thick you could feel it on your skin. Every minute felt like an hour. I moved through the house, my house for only a few more days, feeling like a ghost. I'd look at the armchair where I used to read, the garden I'd tended so carefully, and a pang of sadness would hit me. But then the image of Richard and Dorothy laughing would flash in my mind, and the sadness would harden into resolve. I was amputating a limb to save my life. Richard was unbearable. The failure of the dinner had left him moody and impatient. He dropped the loving husband act. He became cold, distant. He spent hours locked in his home office, talking on the phone in low tones. I knew he was talking to Dorothy, probably plotting their next move. They must have been wondering why I wasn't reacting as expected, why the guilty, neglectful wife was acting so calm. My tranquility was driving them mad. Meanwhile, my secret operation was in full swing. I'd already leased a new apartment, a sleek, modern place downtown with floor-to-ceiling windows and a spectacular view. A place with no memories of him. I'd hired a moving company, scheduling them for the day of the closing. They had instructions to be fast and efficient. I was coordinating everything from my cell phone, in short calls and encrypted emails. I felt like a spy in my own life. I was packing the last box of personal items in my closet, some jewelry, important papers, when my phone vibrated. It was an unknown number. I hesitated, but I answered. It was Daniel Hayes. But there was something different in his voice, an urgency that hadn't been there before. My heart sped up. He told me to listen carefully, and he called me by my first name, which told me this was serious. And then he said, "I found it. It's worse than we thought. Much worse." I sat on the edge of the bed. The world around me seemed to go silent. I asked him what it was, and he told me. It wasn't just gambling debt, it was fraud, criminal fraud. He explained that Richard's desperation was deeper than we'd realized, that 6 months ago he'd taken out a loan for $310,000. I said that was impossible, his credit was terrible. Daniel then corrected me. They wouldn't lend it to him, but they would lend it to Morrison Properties. He used 2 of your commercial properties as collateral. I shot to my feet. I told him I never signed anything. And he replied, his voice grim, "Exactly. He didn't need you to sign. Diane, he forged your signature." The floor disappeared from under me. Fraud, forgery. He hadn't just stolen from me, betrayed me, humiliated me. He used my name, my company's name, the thing I cherished most in the world, to commit a crime. He had exposed me to a risk I couldn't even calculate. If he defaulted, the lenders could come after my properties. I asked him if he was sure. He said he had copies of the documents and a forensic expert had confirmed the forgery. A federal crime. This changed everything. The sheer scale of it hit me in waves. First, shock. Then, a paralyzing fear. And then, a rage so pure, so white-hot, it made me dizzy. This wasn't about a divorce anymore. This was about my survival. And he had just handed me the gun to destroy him. Daniel asked what I wanted him to do. I told him, my voice like ice, to send everything, encrypted. He said it would be in my inbox in 5 minutes. Before he hung up, I thanked him. He just replied that he was doing his job, and told me to be careful. I hung up. I stood there in the middle of my closet, surrounded by the empty shells of my old life. The game had changed. He was a criminal, and he thought he was smarter than me. Daniel's email arrived, and there it was, my signature, forged. On a document that put my entire empire at risk. I looked at that fake signature. that scribble pretending to be me, and I didn't feel pain anymore. I felt a cold, absolute power. He had given me a choice. I could use this to protect myself in the divorce, or I could use this to send him to prison. I saved the files to a thumb drive, which I put with my most valuable jewelry. Those documents were my insurance policy, and they were his death warrant. I walked downstairs. The house was quiet. Richard wasn't home, probably with Ashley, celebrating the bright future he thought was waiting for him. I went to the wine cellar, took out the most expensive bottle I had, an Opus 1 we'd been saving for a special occasion. I opened it, poured myself a glass, and sat on the back porch, looking out at my garden. The sun was setting. The sky was on fire. I raised my glass to the sky. To new beginnings, I said to the silence. I drank the wine, and it went down smooth, like velvet. It was the wine of victory. The day of reckoning was no longer a possibility. It now had a date and a time, and it was much, much closer than he could ever imagine. The day of the closing dawned gray and rainy, as if the Nashville sky was mourning the life I was about to bury. But to me, it was the clearest day of my life. I woke up before 5, as always. Richard was still snoring beside me, a sound that once annoyed me and now was completely indifferent to me. He was just an object in my room, an obstacle about to be removed. I got up silently. I put on my battlesuit, the same navy Tom Ford. As I did my makeup, I looked at my reflection in the mirror. I looked tired, but my eyes had a feverish glint. Today, I wasn't the wife. I wasn't the victim. I was the executioner. When I went downstairs, the first moving team was already parked discreetly down the street, waiting for my signal. I made coffee, like always. Richard came down at 7, complaining about the weather. He didn't notice the hidden boxes in the garage, didn't notice some of my personal items were gone. He didn't notice a thing. He was blinded by his own arrogance. I told him I had a very important meeting, that it might take all day. He replied, distracted, "All right, honey, see you tonight." I smiled and said, "Yes, I'll see you." At 9 a.m., I was at the real estate attorney's office. Patricia was there, beaming. The paperwork was a mountain. I signed every page with a steady hand. Sales contract, title transfer, disclosures. At the end, the buyer's attorney handed me a cashier's check. The number on it was so large it looked unreal. I stared at those numbers, the price of my home, my pain, my freedom. From there, I went straight to the bank. I met Robert, my accountant, who had everything prepared. We deposited the check, and in a series of pre-authorized wire transfers, the money began to move. Like water flowing through secret channels, it moved from my personal account straight into the irrevocable trust Victoria Brennan had set up in Nevada. In less than an hour, the liquid fortune from the sale of my house had, for all legal purposes, vanished. It wasn't mine anymore. It belonged to an impenetrable legal entity. Richard couldn't touch it. When the last transfer was confirmed, I sent a text message to the head of the moving crew. Green light. My next stop was my new apartment. When I arrived, the place was a blank canvas. Empty, quiet, smelling of fresh paint. The floor-to-ceiling windows showed the city pulsing below. My city. I walked to the center of the living room and took my first deep breath in weeks. Relief. A relief so profound my legs felt weak. I'd done it. The hardest part was over. The moving truck started to arrive, bringing the few boxes of things I'd chosen to save. As they worked, I sat on the floor with my laptop on my lap. It was time for checkmate. I connected to the building's Wi-Fi. I opened my email, and I started to write. 3 emails, each one a bullet aimed at the heart of Richard's life of lies. The first email was short, cold, and brutally official, notifying him that the house had been sold and that he had until 5 p.m. to remove his personal belongings. The second email had no text, just one attachment, the complete dossier from Daniel Hayes, with the photos, the debts, and the irrefutable proof of his fraud. And then the third email, the final letter. I wrote, "Richard, I know everything. I was standing outside the door. I heard every word. I detailed everything I'd heard, everything I'd discovered. I told him about the sold house, the restructured company, the trust. I made it clear he would not be getting 1 red cent. And then the final threat. So, here is your only option. You will sign the divorce papers, agreeing that you are entitled to nothing and you will disappear from my life. If you or your mother try to fight this, I will turn this entire dossier over to the district attorney. I will ensure you are prosecuted for fraud. You wanted to play with someone's life. Congratulations, you lost. I read and reread every word. It was cold. It was cruel. It was perfect. With my heart pounding, I hit send on the first email. Waited a minute. Hit send on the second. Waited another minute, savoring the moment. And then I hit send on the third. The final act was almost ceremonial. I opened my contact settings, found Richard's number, block, found Dorothy's number, block, opened Facebook, Instagram, block, block. In less than 5 minutes, I had erased them from my digital life. The silence that followed was the most powerful sound I've ever heard. It was the sound of my freedom. I closed my laptop. The moving crew was finished. My boxes were stacked in a corner. I walked to the window. The rain had stopped. The sun was breaking through the clouds, illuminating the city. My future. I was alone. And for the first time in 7 years, I didn't feel lonely. I felt whole. I didn't have to wait long to find out what happened. Richard's implosion wasn't quiet. It was a fireworks show of desperation and panic, and I had a front row seat, courtesy of Daniel's concise and frequent reports and a few triumphant texts from Vanessa. The first explosion happened less than 30 minutes after I sent the emails. My cell phone, which was on silent, started vibrating nonstop on the coffee table. I didn't have to look. I knew it was him. Vanessa sent me a text. Is he calling you? Mine is blowing up too. So is Dorothy's. I think somebody read his emails. Daniel called shortly after, his voice calm as ever, to inform me that the tracker on Richard's car showed him speeding towards my former residence. You could just picture it. Him reading the emails in his mistress's apartment. The blood draining from his face. The desperate race. Home. Probably thinking it was all a bluff. The second explosion was reported by Patricia, the realtor, an hour later. She called me, sounding shocked, saying a man had shown up at the house, screaming, trying to force his way in, and that the new owners had called the police. I apologized profusely and told her to explain that my soon-to-be ex-husband was having a difficult time. It was his chaos, not mine. The next report came from Vanessa. She sent me a text that made me laugh out loud for the first time in weeks. She'd heard from a friend that Richard had called his lawyer in a panic. The lawyer, upon seeing the emails, had apparently said, "Richard, you're screwed. Criminally screwed. Do not call me again until I tell you what to do, and whatever it is, you sign it." The proof of fraud. That was my ace in the hole. His lawyer knew it. Any attempt to fight for the money meant a one-way ticket to federal prison. The trap was perfectly sealed, but the most delicious part of his downfall came from unexpected places. 2 days later, the internet blew up. Ashley, the mistress, figured out the truth and put him on blast all over social media, complete with photos and sordid details, calling him a liar and saying he'd been living off his fat old wife. The post went viral. Richard's name was Mud. And then came the matriarch. Daniel informed me that Richard, with nowhere else to go, had moved in with his mother. But that peace didn't last long. Dorothy had loaned her son $60,000, believing she'd be paid back from the divorce settlement. When she realized that money was gone forever, all hell broke loose. A neighbor reported hearing screaming for 2 days straight. On the third day, Richard's bags were on the curb. The last domino to fall was his brother, Thomas. With the scandal spreading, his own company's reputation was on the line. He had no choice but to fire Richard. The termination email was short, to protect the integrity of our company. And just like that, in less than a week, Richard lost everything. The house, the ATM wife, the mistress, the money, his mother's support, his job. He was a man with nothing. And to top it off, Daniel informed me that the loan sharks were now looking for him. A week after those 3 emails, my new divorce attorney called. He said Richard's lawyer had been in touch, that he wanted to sign the papers, agreeing to all my terms. He just wanted it to be over. I was in my new living room, watching my moving boxes get unpacked. The war was over. I had simply presented him with the truth, in private, and let him destroy himself with the weight of his own lies. I told my lawyer, "Draw up the papers. Let's get this done." That night the dust began to settle. The noise of Richard's implosion was fading in the distance. I was alone in my apartment, the silence filled only by the hum of the city outside. I didn't feel elation. I didn't feel joy. I felt peace, an exhausted but profound peace. I had survived. I had protected what was mine. I had won. And now, for the first time in a long, long time, I could finally start thinking about what came next. I could start to rebuild my kingdom, but this time, without any court jesters. A year has passed. 12 months. It sounds like a long time, but for me, it's gone by in a flash. The first few months after Richard signed the divorce papers and vanished were strange. I settled into my new apartment, a place that was all mine. Modern, sleek, with a view that reminded me every day of what I was capable of building. But the silence was deafening. For 7 years, I'd had someone's constant presence, even if that presence was a lie. I had to relearn how to be alone. It wasn't a healing process filled with tears and tubs of ice cream, like in the movies. It was a rebuilding process, like one of my real estate projects. I had the foundation, which was myself, but the interior walls needed to be torn down and redone. I threw myself into my work, but in a different way. Before, I worked for ambition, to prove my worth. Now I worked for passion. I launched a new division of my company, focused on urban revitalization in low-income Nashville neighborhoods. We started buying up old, derelict buildings and turning them into affordable housing and community centers. I was using my money and my skills not just to build wealth, but to build a legacy. For the first time, my work had a purpose beyond the bottom line. The local press started to take notice. They called me the Queen of Nashville's Renaissance. I smiled when I read that. Queen of Nashville. They had no idea. I also started taking care of myself. Not for a man, not for my mother-in-law. For me. I joined a gym, hired a personal trainer, not to get skinny, but to get strong. I discovered I loved lifting weights, feeling my muscles work. It was a physical strength that mirrored the mental strength I'd rediscovered. I started traveling, not for business conferences, but for pleasure. I went to Italy, by myself. I ate wonderful pasta without worrying if someone was judging me. I drank incredible wine. I flirted with a charming Italian man in Florence, and I laughed when he called me Bella. I was Bella. I always had been. I'd just forgotten. And Richard? Dorothy? For a long time, I heard nothing. And honestly, I didn't look. They had become irrelevant, a background noise my new life had silenced. The divorce was finalized in record time, a clean, swift process. He signed everything, gave up everything, and disappeared. But curiosity, you know how it is. About 6 months ago, I called Daniel Hayes. I didn't need his services anymore, but I wanted one last report, a final period on the story. I just told him to find out where Richard was, for my own peace of mind. The report arrived 2 days later. It was short. Richard was living in a small town in Arkansas. He'd declared bankruptcy. The loan sharks apparently had found him. He'd had to make a deal with his brother, Thomas, to take out a loan to pay off a portion of the debt in exchange for never setting foot in Nashville or associating his name with the family again. And the best part, the part that gave me a dark, satisfied smile, was his job. Richard Patterson, the man who thought he was a business genius, the charming con artist, was working as a salesman at an appliance store. I pictured him in his cheap little suit with his fake smile, trying to talk someone into buying a used refrigerator. The fall had been absolute. As for Dorothy, Daniel reported she'd sold her house, the one I helped her buy, and moved into a smaller retirement complex. The neighborhood gossip was that she'd become a bitter woman who rarely left her apartment. She lost her son, her social standing, and $60,000. The poison she'd dished out for so long had finally poisoned herself. Today, I live a full life. My business has grown exponentially. The Morrison Community Trust, the charitable arm of my company, is changing the face of Nashville. I've reconnected with old friends, made new ones. Vanessa and I are closer than ever. Sometimes we sit on the balcony of my apartment, drinking wine and laughing about our battles. She calls me Queen Diane, the first of her name, protector of the realm, and we just roar with laughter. Richard is in Arkansas, selling appliances, a ghost of a man who once dared to call me a whale. He lost everything he tried to steal from me, and he lost his family, his reputation, and his dignity on top of it. I learned that the people who truly deserve to be in your life are the ones who choose to truly support you, not the ones who just signed a paper or made an empty vow. I discovered that you should never underestimate a woman who has already hit rock bottom and decided to climb back out. She comes up with a strength no one can predict. And I've come to understand that the greatest victory isn't dragging your betrayer down into the pit with you. The greatest victory is living a life so incredible, so prosperous and so whole, that when you look back, his existence in your story is so irrelevant, it's barely worth a mention. So what would you have done in my place? Do you think I did the right thing? Why don't you write in the comments what city you're listening from? And if you enjoyed my story, please leave a like on the video so the channel can keep bringing you more stories like this. Thank you for all the love. On the screen now, you'll see another story I'm sure you're gonna love. Go ahead and click to watch. Oh, and if you haven't subscribed to this channel yet, don't forget to subscribe, okay? Until the next story.